Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. On the day my fiancée became pregnant with twins by her first love, I packed my bags and resolutely left, leaving behind the engagement ring. Before I left, I commented under their celebratory photo on social media, wishing them a speedy reunion and making room for them. A minute later, my fiancée Mary called. "George, Tom is depressed and wants 2 kids to keep him company. What's wrong with that? Can you stop being so unreasonable?" I scoffed in response, saying that if that was the case, the engagement was off and I wouldn't pursue her any longer. But she immediately panicked. The news of Mary being pregnant with twins caused quite a stir on social media, but it had nothing to do with me, as the father of the children was not me, but her first love, Tom. I scrolled through my friends' updates and clicked on Mary's post, which featured a photo of her and Tom. In the picture, Mary looked blissfully nestled in Tom's arms, her happiness seemingly overflowing from the screen, their hands intertwined over Mary's lightly protruding belly. Mary captioned it, "I finally have the closest connection with Tom. We are the happiest family in the world, and no one can tear us apart." I stared at this social media post like a masochist, each glance causing my heart to ache a little more, and now the pain had become somewhat numb. I really couldn't understand why Mary was treating me this way. Hadn't I been good enough to her in the 5 years we were together? I had always been compliant with her. Whenever she got angry, I would be the first to humble myself and comfort her. Whatever she wanted, I would do my utmost to fight for it. I looked at the diamond ring on my finger. It was dazzling, but the ring on Mary's finger was a plain band, just like Tom's. In that instant, the diamond ring felt like a branding iron burning my finger. My heart, which had already gone numb, began to ache again, accompanied by a heart full of confusion and hatred. If that couple were in front of me at that moment, I truly wanted to tear them to pieces. My eyes turned red with anger, and tears flowed uncontrollably down my cheeks. Finally, I took a deep breath, suppressing the anger in my heart, and left a comment under a group photo on Mary's social media. After that, I stared at my phone, waiting for her reaction. To my surprise, a minute later, her call came in. I looked at the familiar number, hesitated for a moment, but still answered. On the other end of the line, Mary's voice was filled with impatience. "George, Tom is suffering from depression and needs the company of a child. Can't you understand that? Can't you be a little more reasonable? Aren't you a doctor? Don't you know how important companionship is for someone with depression? How can you be so cold-hearted?" Hearing her words, my eyes instantly turned red, and the dense pain in my heart nearly suffocated me. I covered my chest, trying to calm myself down. At that moment, I could also hear Mary softly comforting Tom on the other end of the line. Such tenderness. Ness was something I had never possessed. I held back my sorrow and pretended to be calm as I said, "So let's not get married. Let's cancel the engagement party. That way you can rightfully accompany him, and I won't bother you anymore." After saying that, I hung up the phone and informed friends and family that the engagement party was canceled between Mary and me. It was completely over. Just after notifying my friends and family, Mary called again, clearly determined to keep calling until I answered. I sighed helplessly, thinking about blocking her number, but out of habit, I answered. Mary questioned, "George, are you crazy? Did you consult me about canceling the engagement party? How can you make such a big decision on your own just because you're having Tom's child? Is it really worth getting this angry? I'm not even married to you yet, and you're so controlling. Why are you so petty? Do you even want to be with me anymore?" Hearing her accusations, I couldn't help but laugh. How ironic. She was pregnant with someone else's child, and was questioning me about canceling the engagement party. Did my love for her over the years make her think that whatever she did was justified, that I would forgive her no matter what? I'm human too, and I could be disappointed. I sneered. "Mary, I love you, but I'm not a fool. Knowing that you willingly had a child with someone else, I can't just accept it as if nothing happened." Mary became even angrier upon hearing my sneer and scolded me loudly. "How can you have no sympathy at all? Were you lying to me when I asked you back then?" I was taken aback, suddenly recalling a patient I once encountered who was forced into a pregnancy. Her boyfriend thought she was unclean and abandoned her later. Mary learned about this and asked if I would react the same way. I remembered telling her with a smile that I loved her as a person and would never despise her for anything else, that I would always love her but could be the same. Seeing that I didn't respond, Mary said disappointedly, "George, you're inconsistent. You really let me down. Tom, as a patient, you can't throw away your medical ethics just because you're jealous." Listening to Mary's shameless words, I felt tears welling up in my eyes from anger. I love you, so I should be the one wearing the green hat. I didn't want to hear her voice anymore and hung up the phone. Mary didn't expect me to hang up on her and called back several times. This time I rejected all of them. Seeing that I was rejecting her, she sent a barrage of text messages, each one accusing me of not loving her enough, calling me cold-blooded and selfish. I looked at those messages and the familiar dull pain hit me again. I gripped the railing tightly and started coughing loudly. I was really heartbroken. Everyone knew I loved Mary, loved her enough to risk everything, willing to do anything for her. Yet she treated me this way. It was truly not worth it. I calmly returned home and started to pack Mary's things. After I finished packing, I realized that she had so few belongings it turned out that she often stayed at Tom's place. I had once argued with her about this and she said, "Tom is unwell and needs someone to take care of him. Can't you be less selfish? Tom and I are good friends, like family. Don't be so jealous. If there was really something between us, we would have been together long ago, and I wouldn't still be with you." I love Mary too much, and hearing her say that made me swallow my grievances. After all, they acted so openly that I began to doubt if I was being too petty. But all of that was over now. I no longer had to doubt myself. I took out my phone, intending to call Mary to come back and collect her things. As soon as I opened my phone, I saw a series of transaction messages. She had bought designer bags, clothes, watches, and many baby items for Tom. It suddenly occurred to me that I had given her a supplementary card. Since we had broken up, I should reclaim that card. I canceled Mary's supplementary card and then called her. She answered quickly, and it was noisy on her end. I couldn't help but say, "You're pregnant. Don't go to crowded places." Mary scoffed, "You don't need to worry about my business. Did you come to apologize after what you said to your friends yesterday? That embarrassed me." I was silent for a moment and she continued, "Forget it. I'm in a good mood today, so I won't hold it against you. By the way, George, transfer $3 million to me." I asked why, and Mary said, "Tom's family owes a debt, and the creditor has come looking for him. I want to help him." I couldn't help but say, "His family's debt has nothing to do with me. We've broken up. I called to have you come back for your things." Mary's voice became sharp and she angrily said, "George, have you had enough of this? You're still my boyfriend. How can Tom's family debt not be related to you?" I suddenly felt very irritated, and my love and reluctance for Mary vanished without a trace. She was so self-righteous. Someone like her was not worth my affection at all. Mary's tone remained aggressive. "Hurry up and transfer the money to me, or you'll never see me again in this lifetime." After saying that, she hung up the phone. I listened to the busy tone on the other end, feeling a bit dazed. If it were before, I would have immediately called her back to meet all her demands, but now just thinking about having once loved her made me feel sick. I held my phone, and in a daze I recalled how Mary looked when I first met her. She wore a white dress, her long black hair tied up, beautiful and gentle. How had she changed so much? She had once looked at me with love in her eyes, but I didn't know when it had become only Tom in her eyes. I should have felt pain, but after so many disappointments facing such an ending, I surprisingly felt a sense of relief. At that moment, the special notification sound from my phone rang, and I instinctively clicked to check the latest updates. It was a photo of Mary lying next to Tom with a dazed expression, their necks covered in ambiguous hickeys. This photo made my stomach churn, and I clutched my phone, leaning over and gagging. After blocking Mary, I didn't have time to dwell in sadness. A patient urgently needed resuscitation. I stood at the operating table with another lead surgeon, having not slept for 3 days and nights. After the patient was out of danger, I slumped into a chair. The director came over, patted my shoulder, and gave me a few days off to clear my mind. I understood his intention, smiled, nodded, and dragged my exhausted body home. As night fell, I walked downstairs and saw the lights on in my house. Looking at that bright light, I felt a bit dazed. Once, this was the scene I looked forward to the most when I was utterly exhausted. Someone would leave a light on for me at home. But at this moment I hesitated to approach. I guessed it shouldn't be Mary. She rarely came to my house, and now that we were in such a mess, it was even less likely to be her. With a heart full of confusion, I opened the door, and to my surprise, the person at home was actually Mary. She was busy in the kitchen, her soft hair cascading down her back. In that instant, despite feeling a bit humiliated, I couldn't help but forgive her. Mary heard the noise at the door, looked up, and the smile in her eyes instantly froze, replaced by a strong dislike. She glared at me fiercely. "George, you still know how to come back? Do you know that what you did made it impossible for me to get promoted?" she said with a grim expression. "Tom and I are just family. You should go explain to my boss. Just say you're petty, love to nitpick, and have a dirty mind, which led you to misunderstand my pure relationship with Tom." I ignored her and poured a glass of water to ease my aching stomach. I hadn't had a sip of hot water in 3 days. Seeing me unmoved, Mary suddenly rushed over, snatched the cup from my hand, and smashed it on the floor. I suppressed the anger in my heart and sneered. "Mary, do you think everyone is a fool? You openly post those ambiguous things on social media. What do you think they will think?" Mary's expression changed, and she gritted her teeth looking at me. "I know, so you should clarify it. After all, you're my boyfriend. As long as you don't mind, it means Tom and I are innocent." I sneered again. "Innocent? Are you talking about the kind of innocence where you have a child with Tom and sleep with him?" My words made Mary's face turn pale and then flush. Just as she was about to speak, Tom's voice suddenly came from the master bedroom door. "Mary, forget it. He'll leave. I don't want to make things difficult for you." I looked up and saw Tom standing at the master bedroom door, still wearing my pajamas. I asked Mary, "How did Tom end up here?" Mary ignored me and walked towards Tom, her face full of concern. "Tom, don't be willful. How can I rest assured letting you leave alone? I said I would take care of you for a lifetime." I remained silent, watching their affectionate interaction, feeling nauseous in my stomach. Mary turned her head, looking at me with annoyance. "George, don't be willful either. I just want to give Tom a child to alleviate his depression." Seeing that I didn't get angry, she assumed I was still the obedient person I used to be and said, without reservation, that I was the one who let him move in, impregnate me, and need care. "He's not well and needs care too." Hearing her words, I was both angry and amused. After so many years with Mary, I had never seen her so shameless. I asked her why. "Mary, depression is an illness that requires medication, and as a person suffering from depression, he can't take care of the child at all." Mary said confidently, "I know, so you'll take care of the child when the time comes, and you also have to help me take care of Tom. That's what you should do." I couldn't hold back any longer and threw out all of her and Tom's things. Amid Mary's screams, a sudden sharp pain shot through my forehead, and warm liquid flowed into my eyes, instantly dyeing my world red. It turned out that Mary had picked up a cup and smashed it hard against my head. I couldn't dodge in time and got hit. Mary said coldly, "George, are you really this selfish?" I ignored the wound on my forehead even though it hurt like hell. Maybe my gaze was too terrifying. Mary looked at me with red eyes and said, "How can you be a doctor and not know that emotional pain is the hardest to treat? He has a terminal illness." I secretly checked the compatibility. "Your kidney and Tom's kidney match. Tom is so kind. He doesn't want to hurt you. He just wants to have a child with me to leave a little connection in this world. We have our reasons. Why can't you understand? George, you love me so much. Please donate a kidney to Tom. I really can't lose him." I sneered. His life or death had nothing to do with me. I wished he would disappear from this world immediately. Seeing that I didn't respond, Mary suddenly knelt on the ground, grasping my hand and pleading desperately. "George, after all, Tom is the child's father. The child can't be born without a dad. You also didn't have a biological father while in your mother's womb. You know how that feels." My heart gradually turned cold, and those unbearable past events were unexpectedly stirred up by Mary, suffocating me. I felt my vision darken and Mary's mouth moved, her face becoming strange and distorted in front of me. I instinctively pushed her away. Suddenly a voice rang out. "Did you really do something wrong to George?" It was Mary's parents. They stood at the door, carrying large and small bags, looking weary. Mary's father's face was ash, and seeing Mary shake her head, his expression softened slightly. But Mary said, "Mom and Dad, I didn't wrong George. I just wanted to have a child with Tom. I don't know why he's so angry. I just want to help Tom." Hearing Mary's words, her father turned red with anger, gasping for breath, eyes rolling back, and he fainted in the hospital room. Mary's father slowly woke up, seeing me. Tears glimmered in his murky eyes as he grasped my hand and said, "George, we are sorry for you breaking up with Mary. Is the right thing to do." Mary's mother silently cried beside him. As soon as Mary entered the room and heard her father's words, she exploded with rage. "Dad, I am your biological daughter. Why are you turning against me?" Looking at her father's pale face, she reluctantly said, "It's not that I don't care about George. I just think George is so healthy that he should take care of Tom. He's a patient." Hearing Mary's words, her father couldn't catch his breath, coughing violently while tears streamed down his face as he pounded his chest. I quickly patted his back to help him calm down. Seeing this, Mary looked pained, but she still knelt on the ground, straightened her back and said, "Mom and Dad, George has always listened to you. Please persuade him. I want to cancel the wedding." Mary's mother cried, saying, "George is a good boy. Stop mistreating him. You're already carrying someone else's child. How can you be so shameless?" Hearing my mother's words, my eyes turned red, and the grievances I had been suppressing for days surged to the surface. Mary gritted her teeth and said nothing. My mother continued to persuade. "I want to help you persuade George. He is not a good person either. Listen to your mother. Get rid of the child." Mary suddenly stood up, looking at her mother with resentment. "Mom, whether the child in my belly is yours or Tom's, it's still your grandchild. How can you be so heartless? I want to get rid of the child. This is my gift to Tom." Mary looked at me, and seeing my calm expression, she suddenly became a bit flustered and grabbed my arm. "George, do you really not want me anymore? I promise after I give birth to the child, I will live well with you. It's just that Tom has a terminal illness. Can you donate a kidney to him?" I couldn't help but sneer. I would rather die than donate a kidney to such a person. I treated Mary so well. When she wanted resources, I found them for her. I catered to her every whim and obeyed her every word. When she said she wanted to get married, I gave her a dowry of $13.14 million just to see her smile. But she not only wanted me to be a fool, but also wanted me to pay for Tom's treatment. That was absolutely impossible. After saying a few words to Mary's father and seeing his tired appearance, I left the hospital. Just as I walked out the hospital door, I accidentally bumped into a girl, and she cried out in pain, holding her head. I quickly apologized and she waved her hand, saying, "It's okay. I wasn't paying attention." I looked at the scattered fruit and then at the girl picking it up, so I hurried to the nearby fruit shop and bought a big bag of fruit to give to her. Before the girl could say anything, I heard Mary's furious voice. "George, what are you doing?" Before I could react, Mary walked over in her high heels and slapped the girl. "How dare you seduce my boyfriend?" Mary's voice was loud, and people around us started to look over, pointing at me and the girl. The girl was stunned, looking helplessly at us, her eyes quickly filling with tears. I sighed. I called the girl behind me and handed her a tissue. Seeing this, Mary became even angrier. "Oh, no wonder you want to break up with me. It turns out you have another woman." She lunged at me, trying to hit me, but I grabbed her flailing wrist and pushed her aside. Mary screamed, "George, I'm still pregnant." Upon hearing this, the crowd's expressions turned disdainful, constantly sizing me and the girl up. The girl's face turned red, and she clutched her clothes, saying, "I don't know him." But the crowd only believed what they heard. Looking at Mary's twisted face, I angrily said, "Mary, don't you know why we're breaking up? We were about to get married, yet you were carrying someone else's child and want me to donate a kidney to him. Now I'm just talking to a girl, and you treat me like this? What can I say when you're with him?" As soon as I finished speaking, the crowd's disdainful gazes immediately turned to Mary. Her face turned red with anger, and I couldn't be bothered to deal with her anymore. Looking at the girl's swollen cheek, I felt a bit sorry and took her back to the hospital to treat her wounds. Mary screamed behind us, George, if you dare to leave, we are completely done. I walked forward without looking back. She still couldn't see the situation clearly. I was no longer the obedient person I used to be. The relationship had long since ended. The girl is named Amy, a recent college graduate with only her mother to rely on at home. Amy's mother fell ill and was hospitalized recently, so she took leave to care for her mother but then encountered such a distressing situation. Amy's mother is very gentle. After understanding the situation, she looked at me with a guilty expression and comforted me in return. Young man, although Amy has suffered an undeserved disaster because of you, it is not your fault, so don't take it to heart. I placed a fruit on the table and apologized repeatedly before leaving. After these events, I devoted all my energy to work and no longer cared about Mary. I only occasionally heard from friends that in order to be with Tom, Mary had once again made her father faint with anger. The two of them knelt by their father's hospital bed, and before he could say anything, Tom fainted. Mary was only worried about Tom arguing with her parents, which caused her father to faint again. After that, her parents no longer cared for her, but she happily stayed with Tom. When friends talked about this, their tone was filled with dissatisfaction towards Mary. We are friends from the same circle. Mary's father was once our high school teacher and treated us well, so everyone respected him. Upon learning that he was so upset by Mary that it affected his health, friends all disliked her, and her previously cherished status in the circle was no longer existent. But Mary seemed completely unaware or simply didn't care, wholeheartedly wanting to be with Tom. After listening to my friend's account, I ordered some health supplements from Mary's father. Mary is Mary, and her father is her father. I will not forget the kindness he once showed me because of Mary, nor will I vent my anger on him. I thought the matter would come to a close, but unexpectedly, Mary suddenly appeared downstairs at my company. She was heavily pregnant, wearing cheap clothes and crying pitifully. As soon as I went downstairs, I saw her. She was so thin that she looked like skin and bones, with only her belly round and bulging, which was somewhat frightening. When I saw Mary, she immediately rushed over, tugging at my sleeve, trying to pull me away. I stood still, and since she couldn't move me, she turned and pleaded, "George, Tom is having a medical emergency. Please save him. After all, it's a human life. If you save him, I promise I will do anything for you." After so many years with Mary, it was the first time I saw her so humble and begging me, yet it was for another man. I didn't know what to say. I just looked at her crying with snot and tears, and I felt no emotion inside. I thought to myself, I really don't love her anymore. Seeing that I wasn't speaking, Mary cried even harder, even kneeling down to hug my legs while passers-by stopped to watch. "George, this is a human life," she cried out. But suddenly, I remembered how she and Tom had scolded and blamed me. Just as everyone was accusing me of being cold-hearted, a voice spoke up. "He is also a human being and shouldn't be morally blackmailed. You hurt George's heart for the sake of the Tom you mentioned, so why do you still expect him to repay evil with kindness?" It was Amy. Amy's little face was flushed with anger, gritting her teeth as she stood beside me, blocking most of the crowd's gaze. "I know the human life is paramount, but you don't know what they did to George. Why do you blame him like this?" The crowd still disagreed, echoing Mary and insisting that human life is important. I pulled Mary aside, and in her desperate gaze I calmly said, "Moral blackmail doesn't work on me. I'm not the kind of person who repays evil with kindness. Mary, we are about to get married, yet you are pregnant with his child and still want me to take him back and care for him. I'm telling you clearly, I will not be that fool." Hearing my words, everyone fell silent. After a while, some people began to leave, and then more and more followed. In the end, only the three of us were left, and Mary was sobbing in despair. I ignored her and left with Amy. At that moment, Mary suddenly said from behind, "George, if you save Tom, I will have an abortion and then marry you." I was stunned by her words. Seeing my shock, Mary smiled slightly, got up from the ground and stood in front of me, saying, "I swear I will never contact Tom again and will live well with you." I came to my senses and looked at the complex expression on Mary's face, which showed both reluctance and a compromise for love. I couldn't help but sneer. "Mary, I have never thought that a girl's chastity is that important. Even if you had a relationship with Tom before we got together, I wouldn't mind. But after being..." You still slept with him, got pregnant with his child, and actually expect me to take responsibility? Don't you think that's disgusting? Your behavior makes me feel that you are worthless." As soon as I finished speaking, Mary's face turned pale, her body swayed, and she looked at me sadly. I took a deep breath and left, feeling incredibly relieved. What they say online is true. Some things don't need to be explained, and venting your anger is the real relief. In the days that followed, Mary still wanted to cling to me, asking me to donate a kidney to Tom. But every time, Amy would show up and chase Mary away. Mary's gaze towards us became increasingly strange. One day, she surprisingly wasn't chased away by Amy. Instead, she frowned at me as if looking at a heartless man and said, "George, don't you love me anymore? Have you fallen for her, that little blonde girl, Amy?" Upon hearing this, Amy laughed in anger. "Sister, you've treated George like this, so isn't it normal for him not to love you? I'm younger, but I wouldn't casually sleep with someone else's white moonlight, let alone have a child with her." I looked at the sharp-tongued Amy, and a warm feeling surged in my heart. So this is what it feels like to be defended by someone. Amy noticed my gaze and smiled sweetly at me. Our eye contact provoked Mary, who started screaming while pulling her hair. "George, I forbid you to like her." Looking at the somewhat deranged Mary, I suddenly remembered how, before we went through all this, she often playfully ordered me not to do this or that. Back then, I loved her very much and obeyed her commands unconditionally. But now I shook my head trying to push those memories out of my mind. At that moment, Mary's mother appeared, pulling Mary with tears streaming down her face. "Mary, don't go looking for George anymore. He'll give you money. Go find a kidney source. George doesn't owe you or Tom anything. You can't torment him like this." Mary looked at her suddenly appearing mother, her expression somewhat dazed, then twisted in anger as she questioned sharply, "Mom, are you going to help them too?" Mary's mother just cried, trying to pull her away, but Mary, fueled by an unknown strength, pushed her mother away. Caught off guard, her mother fell to the ground, her head hitting the nearby flower bed hard, and blood quickly began to flow. Amy gasped and quickly took out her phone to call 120, while Mary stood frozen in terror, looking at her hands mumbling, "I didn't use much force. How did she fall down?" Amy and I took Mary's mother to the hospital, but Mary was nowhere to be found. Before long, Mary's father rushed in, and the moment he saw me, his legs gave way and he almost fell. It had been a long time since we last met. Like Mary's mother, his hair had turned gray, and his once straight back had become slightly hunched. He held my hand, tears streaming down his face, constantly scolding Mary. Fortunately, Mary's mother was not seriously injured. The doctor said she needed to rest well and could not be stimulated anymore. He looked at the mother lying in bed, all falling into silence. Mary's father held her hand, sighed repeatedly, and finally said, "George, they'll take you on a trip. I don't want to deal with this anymore. When we're old and can't move, we'll find a place in the countryside, buy a small house, and raise a dog." I didn't know what to say. Looking at his tired eyes, my heart was filled with sadness. Mary's father acted quickly. After selling the house, once Mary's mother had recovered enough, he took her on a trip. Amy and I took them to the airport, and before they left, Mary's mother held our hands tightly, looking at us earnestly. "George, Amy is a good girl. You two should be together," she then said to Amy. "Amy, we've known George for 10 years. He's a good kid, and you must take good care of each other." I was just about to say that Amy and I were just friends, but Amy jumped in and said, "Annie, I will take good care of George. I will treat him well and not let him get hurt at all." Her words moved me but also made me feel a bit uncomfortable. After breaking up with Mary, I felt exhausted with life and lost the courage to love someone again. We watched them go through security, and looking at Amy's sparkling eyes, I suddenly didn't know what to say. Amy tilted her head and winked at me. "I know you don't like me right now, but that doesn't stop me from liking you. Life is short and I like who I like. You can take your time to heal." After saying that, Amy patted her head and said she wanted to eat hot pot. I initially wanted to take her out to eat, but she preferred to have hot pot at home. So I took Amy to buy a bunch of ingredients and went home. Amy pushed me onto the sofa, rolled up her sleeves, and started preparing the ingredients. Watching her busy figure, my heart felt like it was filled with something, and I rolled up my sleeves to help as well. Amy was a bit surprised. "Your cooking skills are so good," I smiled and said. "Before, when I was abroad with Mary, she wanted to eat Chinese food, so I learned to make it." Mentioning Mary made me feel a bit down, and I secretly glanced at Amy's expression. She didn't seem to have any unusual reaction and instead kept praising me. We were enjoying our hot pot meal when suddenly the doorbell rang. Amy ran to open the door, and to our surprise, it was Mary standing outside. Mary looked very pale, and when she saw the hot pot on our table, her expression worsened. I asked her, "What are you doing here?" Mary, with red-rimmed eyes, replied, "I can't even come to see you now." Amy scoffed. "You're already so big and still running around everywhere. If something happens, you'll blame George. What's there to see? You and George have nothing to do with each other anymore." Mary got anxious. "Who are you? Stay out of my business with George." Amy, hands on her hips, said, "MJ's girlfriend. Do you think I can't interfere?" Mary looked at me in shock, her lips trembling as she muttered that it was impossible. I stood next to Amy and wrapped my arm around her waist. Mary took a few steps back. "How can you fall in love with someone else?" Looking at Mary's expression, I felt a bit impatient. Noticing my impatience, Mary hesitantly asked about her parents. Amy sneered. "They went on vacation. If they stayed here, they'd probably be driven mad by you, ungrateful daughter." Since the last time Mary left my house in despair, I had rarely heard from her. Friends knew I had a girlfriend and stopped mentioning her. They invited me and Amy out for dinner, and seeing the gracious Amy, they all blessed us. Gradually, Amy and I really got together and she moved into my house. While Amy and I were organizing things, my phone suddenly rang. It was a call from Mary. I didn't want to answer, but Amy snatched the phone and picked it up. Before we could say anything, Mary's anxious voice came through. "George, help me. Tom has gone crazy. He wants to sell me." Amy usually always argued with Mary and disliked her, but upon hearing this, her expression changed immediately. Before I could react, Amy took out her phone and dialed 110, then comforted Mary, telling her not to worry, saying that she and I would go find her with the police right away. Mary calmed down a bit when she heard Amy's voice. However, when the police located Mary's position and rushed over, they found nothing. Amy and I wanted to take a statement. Although she didn't say much, I knew she was worried both about Mary and about my emotions. When we got home, we saw two unexpected people. Tom and Mary, who were performing a double act. Tom held a knife. The tip pointed to my temple, while Mary had tied up Amy and slapped her a few times, saying, "How dare you compete with me for George?" Tom was a bit impatient, coaxing Mary to search for something. I looked at Tom and said, "You're not sick at all, and you don't need to donate a kidney, right?" Tom laughed and said, "Of course not, but your kidney matches with President Chin's child. If you obediently donate to him, your little girlfriend won't suffer." I forced a smile and glanced at Amy with guilt. It was all my fault for being careless. Even after changing the password lock, Mary still guessed it. Mary was still rummaging around upstairs while Tom skillfully tied me up and pulled out a syringe to inject drugs into himself. I watched Tom enjoying himself. He touched Amy's face, but she bit him. He became furious and kicked Amy a few times. "George, I really envy you. You had the beautiful Mary before, and now you have another pretty girl. You're quite lucky." I was anxious and cursed Tom with all the harsh words I could muster. But Tom didn't care at all and even slapped me cheerfully. Mary is also stupid. She actually thought I loved her. If it weren't for losing a bet, I wouldn't have pursued her. She's just average looking, and only her figure can attract me. By the way, George, did she react when she was in bed with you? Or did she never sleep with you at all? I saw Mary standing at the top of the stairs, her face looking terrible. I thought for a moment and said to Tom, "Why did you come back?" "If you hadn't come back, Mary would have married me," Tom sneered. "I need money. You have no idea how easy it is to deceive Mary. Everyone who's tasted her says the same." I pretended to be curious. "How did you trick Mary?" "Do I even need to trick her? I just sweet-talk her a bit, and she obediently takes the drugs. She has no idea that the person accompanying her every night is different." Although I no longer love Mary, hearing about her situation still pained me. It turned out that after Tom deceived Mary into his grasp, He got bored and used the excuse of not wanting to marry to break up with her. Over the years, Mary kept in touch with him, but he never responded until Mary told him she was getting engaged to me. Tom, who was deep in debt, saw illegal transactions on the dark web and had bad intentions, tricking Mary into getting pregnant, intending to make the child mine and then have Mary whisper in my ear to transfer all my assets to the child while also planning to sell my kidney. After the plan was exposed, he initially wanted to make a quick buck for Mary's family, but Mary's father saw through him and took the assets. Left with no choice, he came up with the idea of selling Mary's body. Tom boasted while constantly belittling Mary. At that moment, Mary quietly approached him from behind and smashed a vase down hard. Just then, the door was kicked open by the police who rushed in. Tom had already been knocked out by Mary, while Mary lay on the ground, blood flowing from between her legs. She was about to give birth. After I finished the statement with Amy, the police said that Mary wanted to see me. On the way to the hospital, I asked the police what punishment she would face. The police fell silent for a moment and said, "Mary has traces of drugs in her system. She is an accomplice and may be sentenced to a fixed-term imprisonment. If you're willing to forgive her, she might get 5 years." When we arrived at the hospital, Mary was sitting on the bed with a loving expression, holding a baby girl. Upon seeing me, a glimmer of light flashed in her eyes. "George, you came to see me. Look how cute our daughter is." Then she saw Amy, who was following me, and her expression instantly turned fierce. "George, you actually don't want me anymore. You've fallen in love with someone else." She hugged the child tightly, causing the baby to cry out in pain. Mary turned her head, tears streaming down her face. "George, I regret it. Can we go back to the past?" I sighed and said, "Amy and I have discussed that we don't want to make your parents sad. So we decided to issue a letter of understanding. But this is not forgiveness. It's for the sake of your parents. Mary, you need to reflect on your actions." Upon hearing my words, Mary's expression changed. She looked at me with resentment. "It's all my fault. It's all Tom's fault for seducing me. It's all this bastard's fault. If it weren't for these, if Amy died, if Tom died, if his child died, you would definitely come back to me." As she spoke, she sobbed. Suddenly, she climbed onto the window sill, holding the child high above her head, and then violently threw the baby down to the ground. Amy, the police beside us, and I didn't have time to stop her. We could only watch helplessly as the child fell, the cries abruptly stopping. Mary went mad in the end. Tom was sentenced to death for multiple charges, including intentional injury, extortion, drugging, and drug trafficking. Mary was sentenced to life imprisonment for intentional injury and intentional homicide. However, after a medical evaluation, she was found to be mentally unstable and was committed to a psychiatric hospital. After the verdict was announced, I sat on the balcony with my phone, thinking about Mary's parents who were traveling, feeling a wave of bitterness. Amy was beside me. I hadn't decided whether to call them, but they called me first with a video call. On the call, Mary's mother looked rosy, and they were enjoying themselves by the seaside. Seeing their vibrant and happy faces made me even more silent. Mary's father looked at me and suddenly smiled, saying, "We know about Mary's situation." I was surprised. Although there was a hint of a smile on their faces, there was more openness. "We still have some connections in this city, so we've learned about the situation. I've taught so many students, yet I couldn't raise my own daughter well. But is this our problem? No, look at you, upright, kind, and smart. Other students are just like you. Although it's painful, we've come to terms with it. When we grow old and can't move anymore, will you come to see us old folks?" As for Mary, Mary's mother took over, her smile still kind, just like when I first met them. "Let's leave it at that. We'll just pretend we don't have this daughter, but we still have you. Don't worry, we won't be a burden to you." Hearing these words, I was in tears. How could it be a burden? If it weren't for you, I might have been harmed by Tom's family back then. Later, Mary's parents returned to this city 3 times. The first time was for my wedding with Amy, which was a traditional Chinese ceremony. We bid farewell to Amy's mother and also bowed to Mary's parents. The second time was when Amy and I had our child. They came to visit. The third time, when the child could speak, they returned to handle some matters, and the child hugged their legs, calling out, "Grandpa and Grandma," so they decided to stay. I took the two elderly people to the psychiatric hospital to see Mary. She was so thin that she was just skin and bones, sitting dazed in her hospital room. The moment Mary's mother saw her, she cried. And her father was also very upset. But Mary just glanced at us, then hugged the pillow in her arms and said, "George, the baby is hungry. You go make it some food." She gently set down the pillow and reached out toward the corner, saying, "George, we need to be together forever. Please don't ignore me, okay? I love you the most." Her eyes were hollow and confused, as if she had fallen into her own fantasy world, completely unaware that everything around her had changed. Seeing her like this, I felt a mix of emotions. The love that once existed had long since faded, leaving only endless sighs and a touch of pity. After leaving the psychiatric hospital, life returned to calm. Amy and I devoted ourselves to our little family, and our child grew up healthy and happy under our care. Every day, seeing the innocent smile of our child, I felt incredibly fortunate to have emerged from that painful past, to have met Amy, and to have the happy life I have now. As the child slowly grew up, he began to be full of curiosity about the world, chasing after Amy and me with all sorts of questions. Whenever he called out Daddy and Mommy in a sweet voice, I felt it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Amy and I would also accompany him in exploring this wonderful world, taking him to the park to play, telling him bedtime stories, and watching him thrive in the embrace of love. Mary's parents played an important role in our lives. They transferred part of their love from Mary onto us and the children. They helped us take care of the kids, teaching them some life lessons and principles of being a good person. With their companionship, the children not only felt the love from their parents but also experienced the care from their grandparents, becoming increasingly cheerful and confident in their personalities. Occasionally, I still think of the past with Mary, but those memories no longer cause me pain. They are like a gentle breeze softly rushing over my heart without stirring up any waves. I know that one must look forward. The mistakes and pains of the past are the cost of growth. I am grateful for everything I have experienced, as it has taught me to cherish those around me, and made me understand that true love should be based on mutual respect, loyalty, and understanding. One weekend after the children started school, our family sat together in the living room watching television. Suddenly, a story about love and betrayal played on the screen, making me think of Mary again. I turned to look at Amy, who was gently watching the children, her eyes filled with love. I gently held her hand, and she felt my gesture, turning to me with a sweet smile. In that moment, I knew I had found my own happiness and understood that happiness is actually very simple. It is having someone who understands you, truly accompanies you, along with a lovely child and a warm family. Time flies and the children gradually grow up to pursue their dreams. Amy and I are also slowly growing old, but our feelings for each other have deepened. Mary's parents spent their happy later years in our company and passed away peacefully. Looking back on my life, although I have experienced many ups and downs, I ultimately gained a lot of happiness. I am grateful that when faced with betrayal, I bravely chose to let go. And I am also thankful for meeting Amy during the low points of my life. She was like a beam of light illuminating my dark world. I think this is fate's arrangement, allowing me to cherish the warmth of the sun even more after going through storms.